and welcome to another special edition of Fully Scored. I'm your host, Matthew Frost. In today's episode, we're delving into the world of trumpet playing, and I'm delighted to be joined by three world-class trumpeters. Let me introduce them to you. First up, we have Philip Cobb. Phil is principal trumpet of the BBC Symphony Orchestra. As well as his illustrious orchestral career, Phil is also one of London's most in-demand session players, and his credits include a vast array of film soundtracks, from Shrek, Jurassic World, to Barbie and Wicked. Phil has also recorded several solo CDs, most recently Love Song with the International Staff Band. If you'd like to hear more about Phil's life, faith and music making, we interviewed him all the way back in 2020 in episode 4 of this podcast. Secondly, we have another Philip, this time from the other side of the Atlantic. As former principal trumpet of the New York Philharmonic Orchestra for over 35 years, Philip Smith is one of the most highly regarded orchestral trumpet players in the world. Phil is also renowned as an outstanding soloist, whether it's playing a traditional Air Varies Salvation Army Cornet solo, or duetting the Vivaldi Double Trumpet Concerto with Wynton Marsalis. He has done it all. You can hear more from Phil in our interview in episode 8 that we recorded live during lockdown. And last, but certainly not least, a trumpet player we've heard from more recently on the podcast, episode 72 to be precise, Louis Dowdeswell. Louis is also one of the most in-demand session musicians in London, with a hugely impressive list of film credits, from James Bond, No Time to Die, to Aladdin and Barbie also. Louis is known for his lead trumpet sound, and this has seen him record and perform with some of the world's most recognisable artists, such as Paul McCartney, Taylor Swift, Robbie Williams and Michael Bublé, just to name a few. He's also frequently heard on West End shows and has had millions of views of his YouTube performances. What unifies these three gentlemen, as well as being world-class musicians, is also their faith. And in our chat we spoke about some of their playing experience, but also their experiences of Christianity, each bringing a different outlook on what their beliefs look like and how their faith plays out in their day-to-day lives. Let's hear what they had to say. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us on this very special Trumpet Chat edition of Fully Scored. It's great to see you all again. Looking forward to hearing what you have to say as well. So, I don't know, I presume Phil and Louis, you've worked together a fair bit before, but have you all met? Or is this the first time?
This is the first time for me meeting Louis and camera face to camera face.
Yeah,
So,
first time meeting Phil Smith.
Yeah.
But yeah, Phil Cobb and I have worked together. Obviously, we got two Phils in the call, so hopefully we can make not too much of a mess of that. But yes, first time. Very exciting. I'm very excited.
Yeah, it's good to meet you, bro.
So these Zooms can sometimes be a bit awkward to start off with. I'm sure that's the technology and not just the people joining us. So I thought, to get us started, I've got some nice, fun icebreaker questions just to get the chat flowing. So, first one may help us out with the dual Phil situation. Have you ever had a nickname?
No.
So I've always worried about this one because I give people nicknames quite a lot at work, and it always freaks me out a little bit. I mean, I get the sort of Cobby one and things like that, but I sort of think you need to worry sometimes when people don't give you a nickname, especially when you're dishing them out.
It wasn't behind your back.
Well, exactly. That's what I'm worried about. Yeah, but no, other than Cobby, no, not really.
I don't really have one either, to be honest. It's not a very helpful start, that, is it?
My bass trombone colleague at the Philharmonic, we were good friends. We commuted together, and his nickname for me was Weezer. And the why is simply that when I laugh, I tend to wheeze. That kind of thing. And so that was the only nickname I had, Weezer. So if you feel it's appropriate for this to refer to me as Weezer, I'm okay.
We'll see how the chat goes, shall we? If it's very funny, maybe it will suit it. Right, so maybe this question will be a little bit more fruitful to get us started. What was the first mouthpiece you ever owned?
Now you took my question. I was going to be the geek guy that asked everybody what horns and mouthpieces they played. Although I know that. I've already looked that up because I'm that geeky. But the first mouthpiece I ever played was on my... the first horn I had, my granddad bought me an old bandmaster cornet. And I still have the mouthpiece. It was a Herald cornet mouthpiece. And it's really chewed up and beat up, but it looked like a French horn mouthpiece. And that was, I played that mouthpiece right up to my last year in high school, so 12th grade, before I went to Juilliard. And I would put a shank on the end of that because my high school band teacher said, if you're going to go into music, you got to play the trumpet. You just can't play the cornet. So I got a shank, my dad got a shank, and I put that old Herald mouthpiece in there, and that's what I played trumpet on. And so that's kind of fun. It's kind of fun for me to pull that out and to show the kids in the studio, this is, hey, see if you can make a sound out of this thing. And see if you got a C on the staff, let alone a high C. So when I got my first mouthpiece, I went and bought my first trumpet just before I went to Juilliard, and I went to Old Man Giardinelli in New York City and bought a Bach trumpet, which is the B flat that I play to this very day. It's been redone numerous times with the same horn, and the trumpet mouthpiece that matched that was a 10.5 C because it was the diameter that these old Herald mouthpieces were. It's very small. But of course, it was a 10.5 C, so it's like, man, I had instant high notes. It was like, this is great. This is wonderful. So my first cornet mouthpiece was at Herald, and the first trumpet mouthpiece was a 10.5 C.
Go on, Louis.
Oh, it's very boring, I'm afraid. I had... I think the first trumpet I ever got was a Bach TR-300. I still have it back there. And it came with a 1 1/4 C. And I played that up until... maybe about 14, 15 years old. I couldn't play it though. Like it was really bad. It was way too big for me. Hurt my teeth. Kind of sat just too high on my front two teeth, and I used to get bruising after about 30 minutes. Not very useful that. And I couldn't really play any higher than about a high A on it. 10, 11, 12 years old. And I would have to pull it right down like this, squeeze it in, and too much. I think I can probably get away with it these days, but it's I think I might still have it actually, 1 1/4 C. Yeah, pretty standard.
Well, for me, I was very similar to Phil. When I was 3.5 at Christmas, I was given an old bandmaster's battered cornet from my grandfather, actually, or at least I think that's where it came from. And I'm not sure what mouthpiece that came with, but the first mouthpiece I ever remember having was a Denniswick 4B, and very similar to Phil. I mean, I played that right up pretty much through the bulk of my college, because I did the first 2 years of music college at Guildhall when I was in the staff band, so I was still doing and Hendon band, so I was still doing quite a bit of cornet work. But yeah, the 4B, and I've never drifted away from that sort of diameter. I can't play big. Louis mentioned a 1 1/4 C, and I just can't play things as big as that. So the 4B kind of diameter was where I stayed, which I suppose is relatively small.
So what trumpet mouthpiece do you play, Philip?
Me,
We've only got a few hours.
It depends what day it is.
I remember, Phil. I remember you came to. I did the Future All Stars years ago, maybe 10 years ago or something, and I did some stuff with the kids, and I did a couple of solos with the New York staff band, and then I did like a little 20-minute recital, and I remember you coming up to me and asking me about mouthpieces. Do you remember this conversation or not?
I don't know.
Because I can't remember how old I was, but I think I was probably 18, 19 or something. And you came up and you said, so what? I think I did something from the Haydn or the Hummel, and I did a flugel piece, a Salvation Army flugel piece. I did a slow melody on the cornet. And of course, getting on the flight, I just brought the limited amount of instruments that I could and borrowed what I could when I was in the States. And I think I mean, I'm embarrassed now, but I think I even shoved a cornet mouthpiece into the flugelhorn to do the flugel piece. And you came up and made polite conversation with a stupid 18-year-old, 19-year-old, and you said, well, what mouthpiece do you use on this? And I said, well, I use that today, you know. What about this? And I said, oh, well, I didn't bring my flugel mouthpiece, so I just put my cornet mouthpiece in. I remember you looking at me saying, man, you live dangerously. So, yeah, I'm not the best person. I very much, mouthpiece-wise, I go on feel. I'm not the best. I don't mess around with trumpets. And if I'm brutally honest, trumpets don't really interest me. But I do have an awful lot of mouthpieces that if it doesn't feel right, I'll chop and change. And I think, Louis, you've probably seen that a few times when we've worked together. But I wouldn't recommend it.
I remember doing my first session with you, and we were playing something very difficult. It was the first cue. And I was on fourth trumpet, and you were on principal, and it was for Disney. And you had some like high double tonguing or triple tonguing high Ds or something. It sounded amazing. And you turned to me and you said, what mouthpiece are you playing? It's like, I think at the time it must have been the Bergeron GR or something, you know, proper lead trumpet mouthpiece. And he said, give it air. And I gave it to you. You just put it in and played exactly the same thing on the next pass, on the next take, and it sounded exactly the same. And then you looked at it and you went, huh, and then just gave it back.
I'll tell you, the power of prayer is amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. Brilliant.
Well, isn't it fun to know, for all of the young folk that are watching this, that even us dyed-in-the-wool trumpet players are geeky enough to talk about mouthpieces and all that sort of stuff. So it's interesting, you know.
And if that's where we're starting, I dread to think where we're going.
I don't know. I was going to say that's all inside the first 5 minutes. Yeah.
Let's take a slight U-turn, shall we? Still related to the music thing, but what's the most terrifying gig you've ever played?
Man, you took all my questions.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I can change it if you want.
No, I think that's great, because I was going to ask that, you know, because everyone thinks, you know, when you look at your favorite, you know, to be honest, I stole the phrase that we all have to have a Gabriel, somebody that we admire and we aspire to be like. My Gabriel was Bud Herseth or you know, so many different pieces, Maurice Andre, stuff like that. But so even young folks today have to have that. But it's nice to know that your Gabriels can be fallible. We're not really Gabriel, and we're trumpet geeks. We have these moments that are frightening and things that like shook us and all of that. We had to work through those things. I think that's great to know, because that's the human condition. So anyway, I'm interested to hear other people. What's your? I'll tell you mine when you tell me yours.
You're only terrified if you care, right? Otherwise, you can't be terrified. So, I think when I got asked to play with the big fat band, Gordon and Goodwin's band, on the European tour in 2017, and Wayne Bergeron wasn't going to be there, and I was only 23 at the time, and they took a risk. And Gordon said, do you want to come out and do the tour? And I think, just because it was the dream gig for me, I think it was the gig that at 8 years old, I've always said this, you know, I never ever even anticipated seeing the band live, let alone playing with them, let alone playing for Wayne. When that happened, I remember going to the rehearsal and just like flying in. They'd all flown in. The first gig was in Lviv, Ukraine. And we did the rehearsal, and during the rehearsal, it seems so silly really, but I think it's because I obviously built this thing up in my mind. And when you do that, you still have to go in and just bang. You know, you still have to just go and do it. There's no out. And I remember in the rehearsal, Sal Lozano loved him to pieces. Everyone was a bit jet lagged and a bit rusty, and I think the first tune that Gordon called was like chord note equals 280 or something, like really, really, really fast, and just trying to, you know, get going, stressed out. and apparently the trumpets were a little bit behind. But Sal turns to the drummer, Jamie, who was also doing his first gig, and Jamie goes, "Jamie, don't let the trumpet slow down," like this. And I'm like, oh my God, you know. And then it was only that I found out that on the gig, which happened the next day, that Wayne was actually watching the live stream. So that was pretty tough. But I wasn't that scared. I was just very excited. But it was a big shoes to fill, so to speak. But yeah, probably that. It's an awesome gig. Very grateful to have done it. Yeah. How about you, Phil?
I don't think I've ever gone out on a stage and felt terrified. I think I've gone out there, I've done, silly little things, well, not silly things, obviously, but things like funerals and weddings and things that matter, like you say. But one experience I do remember looking up and being able to hear the heartbeat was when I did the Maurice Andre competition, because there was they had the first, second, third, and then the final round all on the same stage. So this stage was big enough for a full orchestra. And I remember the walk. I had some posh shoes on or something at the time, and I remember the walk across the stage, and being able to hear my shoes go across this stage with silence, and looking out to a panel of 8 or 9 people of Maurice Andre, Thierry Cans, Jim Watson, all these amazing soloists, and looking up. And I remember thinking to myself and saying to myself, well, there's no turning back now. You can't, there's no out, you just got to do it. So I think that was probably a moment that I definitely remember thinking, this is quite a big deal. And of course I did the competitions with the brass band, but the whole solo competition on your own, you're walking around before at the event, and all these kids knew each other, and they all had these massive trumpet cases where they knew all the repertoire. They knew when the next competition was. They'd done the last one, and for me that was the one and only one that I did, and it was definitely a character building exercise for me, for sure.
Yeah, I agree with you guys. I don't think we go into things as being terrified. You can't have that kind of head to be afraid, and being that this is what we're going to talk about, faith as well. The scripture tells us that God doesn't give us a spirit of fear. And so to embrace that spirit of fear is to embrace something very negative. But obviously preparation is a part of what we do. We've prepared, we go into things, and things are tense. We understand that, as you both said. I think for me, there have been numerous times, I think early in my career, when I was like you, Philip, feeling like, what am I doing here? Like, I don't really belong here. And so there's that apprehension to the end of your career where it's like, okay, here I am at age 60 and someone's wanting to come to hear Mahler 5 the way I played it when I was 25. And then there's that apprehension. And so you're always trying to achieve the best that you can give. And you're always wondering, you're going like, well, I did my, I often say to my kids, God's not in the business of giving high C's, but I do believe in miracles. So there are times when it's like, come on, Lord, help me out here. But I have lots of sort of anecdotal things of going out and playing in front of Herseth, like when I first got my job. And to me, Herseth was kind of God in small g, but he was the guy that I wanted. And here I am playing with him, and I couldn't refer to him. I would refer to him as Mr. Herseth, and then he says, Philip, we're colleagues now, so you have to call me Bud. And I couldn't call God Bud. It's like, so I can remember internally being like anxious about when I had to talk to him. So I wouldn't talk to him until I caught his eyes, and then I would interject the conversation, because I didn't want to offend him by calling him Mr. Herseth, and I couldn't call him Bud. So there's that. And then there's also the other side of it was, someone like a Leonard Bernstein, who was just a huge musical figure. And when you're confronted with that personality, to give what he wants, and if he asks you to do something, that infamous YouTube video of him dealing with some trumpet players where they're not giving him what he wants, and you're trying to say, I don't want to be that. I want to be the guy that gives him what he wants. So there's those apprehension moments. I think one of the big, great moments for me is when we would do the Messiah, and I had to play. You sit there, you're either bored to death or you're scared to death. That's what playing brass instrument is like. You sit there for most of the Messiah and you're not doing anything, and then in the last 15 minutes, it all breaks loose. And to stand up and play the trumpet shall sound, we did this in Riverside Church. And as you stand up to play the trumpet shall sound, you look to the back of the church and there's this image of Christ on the cross. And it just was like, wow, what I'm about to portray here is the final judgment call, the final call of Christ, the last trumpet. And I can remember just having my heart, as you said, Philip, your heart just going boo, 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 and you just have to go down, boy, here we go. And off you go. So apprehension moments, not terrifying moments, but apprehension, because you want to give it your best.
Phil, just going back a couple of steps in what you just said there. If I'm right, I might be way off the mark, but you didn't actually work with Bud for very long, did you, in terms of a career? But what was the biggest? I mean, obviously you grew up listening to his recordings that most trumpet players, if they don't, should be still listening to. But what was the bit from working with the guy? I'm not talking from listening to him play. From working with him, what was the biggest thing you learned from him?
What I learned from him. I worked closely with him for 3.5 years when I played in Chicago Symphony. And then we did lots of things after that together. But what I learned from him was integrity, the word integrity and consistency, those words. Integrity, he came to the first rehearsal, he knew what he was going to do, subject to what a conductor would say. But he had an opinion, and your job was simply, he did not like to talk in a section. He didn't want to reach down and say, can we try that? Can we tune that up? Can we play the 16th this way? He played it, and he played it the same way every time. And your job was to zero in on that and match that. And so it was a consistent integrity performance. He wasn't all over the map, so you couldn't figure out what he was doing. And that integrity to do, again, the best that he could do at that moment on that piece, and you to be following him and to be like a glove, was what impacted me the most. Less torque, more consistency was what I learned, and how I tried to run my section was just be consistent.
And Louis, would that be a similar thing with somebody like Wayne?
Not sure, but I know that it's the case with someone like Cy Gardner. Because sitting next to Cy, someone will ask a question and he just goes, listen. Something like that, he'll just say, don't worry about it, just follow me. And Cy's the same. He just, every single time, is exactly the same. With Wayne, I think Wayne likes talking a bit more, but I've only ever been in a section with Wayne twice, once in LA and then once in Japan, and it's just a bit of a blur, really. Yeah, you'd have to speak to someone that works with him all the time. But with Simon Gardner, definitely. I mean, I used to talk a lot as a leader, because I used to think that it made people feel included, or I used to think that it would help by sort of codifying what we were trying to achieve. But I think it's actually just like a slight doubt if you're doing that. It's like a slight lack of faith. Might just be better just to know what you're doing, do it, and if someone isn't hearing it, then they might not be the right person. I'm not sure, or they have to figure it out as they go. But yeah, I can see why Simon is the way he is with that. And I learnt a lot too from sitting next to Simon, feeling like that. It's cool.
And then it's not to say that you don't talk, because I think, obviously if you come to the last rehearsal and it's still we're not together, then then it's your job to sort of turn down the line. And I've seen this happen. I've seen people turn down the line and just berate somebody, and I hate that. But I would want to turn down the line and say, can we just try that? I'm not able to line up with what you're doing there. Can we just, so it wasn't, you're not doing this. It was like, we can't find that. Let's find that. So that's an important element, I think, of leadership as well. Wayne was a great guy. I've worked a couple of times with Wayne, and we brought him in we did a whole soundtrack to West Side Story. So they're showing the movie and we're playing the soundtrack. So it's one thing to do symphonic dances. Yeah, okay, I got to be able to play that. But when you're doing the whole show, it's like, no, there's some things I just can't do. So you bring Wayne in, and you hear him like on the mambo, bam! It's just like wham, and I'm sitting there going, "Holy smokes, how do you do that?" And then I'm going, and he's going, "How do you do that?" I'm going, it's like, man, I want to do what you're doing. So he was a lovely fella, a lovely guy to work with. I enjoyed the times that I worked with him.
So just to give listeners a little peek behind the curtain, I've asked each of you to prepare 3 questions for the other 2 panellists you're on with. So before I take any more of your questions, Phil, perhaps we can sort of jump onto those if you haven't asked them already. We've got a question each about trumpet music specific stuff. Then we're going to move on to something about faith, and I'm sure each of you have very different outlooks and thoughts about faith. And then finally a wildcard question as well. So Phil, before I take any more of your questions, do you want to go first?
Well, faith, yeah. How do we incorporate faith into being a trumpet player? I get that question so many times from young students. Like, I admire your expression of faith in your career. Well, how do we do that? How does faith impact our lives as trumpet players? And let's face it, as semi-prominent trumpet players in what we do. How does faith impact our lives?
Well, I have a question here which is similar. I'm going to ask it because I think if I ask it, then we can kind of wrap these two in. And they're kind of similar in that my personal experience with faith and trumpet is short, because I've only been a self-proclaimed Christian as of about October 2024, I'd say, something like that, somewhere around there. And before that, I was a hardcore atheist. So how do you best navigate the industry in your faith? Because I've spoken to Phil Cobb a little bit about this. The more convicted I was, the more uncomfortable certain people were. And they happened to be the people that were closest to me. And that makes sense. Because if you go to change something fundamental about your beliefs, then you're also from a position of humility saying, well, I believe I was wrong. But people don't like being told that they're wrong, or feeling like they are now wrong because someone that used to share your worldview doesn't feel that way anymore. And and without having to say anything about it, it sort of puts the onus on them. Now, I'm interested in your 2 positions on how to participate in this industry with conviction and faith. But how, as I say, another part of my question is, I think both of you went into the industry with a faith. Now, I had a faith. I just had a faith in something totally different. But I went in. That's not been my experience. My experience has been 10, 12, 13, 14 years feeling one way, and then all of a sudden changing. And that the change has been the interesting bit, because now I sort of feel like I'm at the other side of it. It's a little bit the lines are a little clearer. But how we participate, I mean, I've learned the hard way by, I guess, had to learn a lot in a couple of years. And when something really amazing like this happens to you, you want to share it with the people that are closest to you. And that wasn't a good idea. Or it was a good idea. I don't know, only God knows. So I feel like the answer to your question, at least from my perspective, is I can only navigate, or I can only participate as a trumpet player in the world as long as I'm constantly aiming to be better. And the world will only change if all of us do that. So it's on everyone individually to use their faith to have an impact, even if it's just a small amount. And the other thing that's happened that's been amazing for me is that because I don't identify as a trumpet player anymore, I identify in Christ. I just happen to play the trumpet. That has been extraordinarily freeing, and I would encourage everyone that's doing this, that has faith, to recognize that you're loved by God, regardless of whether or not you're a trumpet player. And this might not be necessary for some, but for me, it was definitely necessary because everything was based on how well I could do that thing. And actually in that, the stress of having to perform like that actually ended up making me probably perform worse. So that's the beauty of faith. I don't know if I answered your question, but I'm talking around it a little bit and getting some just trying to speak from the heart, really. So yeah,
I think for me, I've never found talking about my faith particularly easy, particularly at somewhere like work. But what I have always tried to do is lead by example. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean at all that I've always got it right. But that is something, the older I get, I'm more and more conscious of, particularly on a Sunday at church, actually. And possibly should be more daily, but particularly on a church, I'm just checking myself. You know, how have I behaved in the way that I think God wants me to behave this week? Have I looked out for people? Have I focused enough on myself to be able to make a difference? And I think that is something, possibly, like Louis said, you're more aware of that when you have kids, because that whole being an example thing is fresh in the mind. But that's certainly something that I've always tried to. I think Louis and I have had that conversation, if not once, 2 or 3 times. But almost the softly approach in some ways of leading by example, having confidence and having faith in who and what you represent, and obviously praying about that and believing in that. And if you're doing that in the right way, then at some point people ask questions. And then that might be your opportunity, although I have to say I'm still not somebody who finds it very easy, but that may be your way in to speak about it and have conversations about it. But that's always been my, I think the beauty of the way I see it anyway, not being one of the world's greatest trumpet players or anything like that, but this God-given talent that I've been given, and to be able to share that with people in so many different places, arenas. I feel so privileged to be able to do that.
I think you've all touched on great things. Numerous things. For me, faith is a worldview, right? It's a coming to understand who Jesus Christ is. That's what faith is to me. It's not a set of rules. It's not a book. It's coming to understand and accept who Jesus Christ said he was, and come to believe that. And I haven't watched all of The Chosen, but I find watching some of those episodes on The Chosen really really great because he fleshes the humanity out of the scripture when he makes those movies. So here we have Christ walking with these people who become disciples. He invites them to follow him, and it's a process of them beginning to understand who he is, Christ. And they get it wrong numerous times, and they don't understand who he is, and they can't. They're bickering with each other, and who's the best, and I want to be next to him the most, and who's the favorite, and all of that, and they're missing the boat so many times, and yet it gets right down to the end where they're able to say, "For me to live is Christ," and Peter says, Christ says, "Who do people say I am?" And then Peter says, "But you're the Christ." And they finally, through a process that we all go through, they get to the point where they understand who Jesus Christ is, and then they live that. And that's, I think, for us, the exact same thing. What we're all saying here is that we've come to a point where we understand who Christ is. That's revealed to us in various ways, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, sometimes immediate, sometimes in a process. But it's coming to a point to understand and accept who Christ says he is, and then live that. For me to live is Christ, and to live in that, and not to buttonhole other people about I have this and you don't, but it's just to live in the joy of the Lord, and to be known by our fruits, and to share those fruits. And obviously, there are some times when the fruit goes sour, and we're not exuding those fruits the way they ought to, and that's where we come into checking ourselves and going a little deeper. And then all of those points that you said about having kids, and that helps organize our life. But it's living that life as a Christian, and it's the same in our business as it would be being a Christian as a plumber, or a Christian teacher, or a Christian football player, or a Christian baseball player. It's just the environment. We happen to be in the musical environment, and we represent that life of Christ out there, and we're comfortable in different ways. Louis, I was impressed to read, on your bio that you put right in there at the back, that you're a follower of Jesus Christ. And there have been times when I've made myself on a recital give a witness, give a short word, a testimony, if I just play something, even if it's just reading the words. But this is something that I'm identifying myself. I'm not being, again, like Peter, who denies him and then feels terrible, but comes, making myself stand forward and say, I'm identifying myself as a Christ follower, and taking that chance. And yes, that will alienate us at times, and it will require us to change relationships sometimes with people. And sometimes people will change their relationships with us when we wish they wouldn't have done that, just because I identified myself as being in Christ. But that's what we do. And that's, to me, that's how we go about it.
Not really sure how to carry on from that. That's a very profound point. Thank you so much for all of you sharing your different viewpoints on faith there. Do you find, as musicians that are recognised internationally, as musicians, particularly as trumpet players, with that platform that affords you, do you find that there's a responsibility to share your faith? Or do you think that just by being you live that out?
That's a great question. Well, I had the platform before I became a Christian, and that was really uncomfortable. See, when you have a platform, not that I have the biggest one in the world, but amongst trumpet players, it's relatively large. The responsibility of that was totally overwhelming and unbearable before becoming a Christian, because I didn't have the necessary wisdom or the correct why and intentions behind the platform at all. It was really just, I guess I did, in that when I was releasing stuff, I think I must have been in some kind of alignment with God without realizing it, and creating and making. But the how do I say this? The sort of the pain of the comment section and the concern, even though they were overwhelmingly positive, I didn't have any out. I didn't have a scapegoat. I didn't have like something that I could aim at that wasn't just myself. So I didn't have the necessary wisdom to overcome what that responsibility was. When I became a Christian, the why changed so dramatically, and it changed from, I think I might have said this on my podcast with you originally, it changed from, I guess I'm doing this because I like it, or because, I'm good at it, or something like that, to, oh wow, I've been afforded this fantastic gift. Because you guys, the Brits, will know this, right? There's this kind of this necessity to self-deprecate, which is, I see it as a fake humility now. It's not real humility, it's fake. It's like, I tell everyone that I'm bad at this. And when you have a big following, that doesn't really work, because they don't want to hear you talk about yourself like that. So I was always in between this strange thing where I couldn't acknowledge that what I was doing was actually enjoyable for people, and yet that was the case, and I didn't have the language necessary, to accommodate that. So, all that being said, when I did change, the story became, well, I've been afforded this amazing gift. I should be grateful for it. And I now have an obligation to share it. I don't have a choice. I don't get to decide to fear away and not offer this anymore. Whereas before it was like, oh, I don't want to show anyone what I can do, because if I do that, then I'm being cocky, right? So this is a very strange mixture of things that I had to deal with as a kid, I think. And then and a lot of people don't have any idea. They don't understand any of that side of it. And I envy them in a way. Like, why wouldn't you just share what you can do? What's wrong with that? Well, I had a lot of things that were wrong with that, and had this. You said this responsibility, this platform, and I didn't know how to. It felt like I had to satisfy it. It's the wrong way of looking at it. Like, I had to satisfy the platform, like I was pleasing the platform, rather than just serving and offering the afforded gifts. So it's much simpler now. It was so unbelievably complicated and complex. And the Brits definitely have a complicated view on things. It doesn't have to be as complicated as it is. It's just a general culture observation. So now I just feel a lot freer. If you don't like it, that's fine. That's how I deal with it. I'm just trying to offer what I have and trying to give value to the world in a way that is aligned with the principles and values that I now try and live by. So if that means trumpet playing, great. If it doesn't mean trumpet playing and it means talking about something to my followers, which I've started doing a bit more of, which I'm enjoying a lot, then great too. And I've been recently talking a little bit about my faith to my followers, but that's been very difficult too. It's just been uncomfortable. So I think as I grow, that will get easier and easier. And as I realize that there's nothing to really fear, because it's just fine, then it gets easier too. There's a lot of fear in there, It all feels like everything's crumbling, but I have enough faith to recognize that it's for the right reason.
I've never really sought to achieve a platform. I've just tried to do the best that I can in the gifts that I've been given. And I think that's part of growing up, and especially being a college teacher, just trying to take kids and help move them along and expose them to, some of the obvious gifts that I may see that they've got and things like that. But also, as you grow, you discover that you're probably gifted in more ways than you think you are. The trumpet playing may be the natural thing that pops out, but you may find that, you become gifted as a speaker or a teacher, or in different things. Gifted as a father, gifted in how you relate to kids and things like that. And so it's just, Louis, I liked what you said at one point, where you said that it's not about you being a trumpet player anymore. That's not the pinnacle, if I understood you correctly. Yeah. And I would agree. If I can, once we get to the point that we're not identified as trumpet player, we're identified as Phil Smith or Phil Cobb or Louis, and we're identified for who we are. And again, as our experience and our faith grows and all of that and all the different gifts come together, that creates this image of who we are, if you will. And I think people build the platforms. I don't think we should try to build a platform. I think if you are a platform builder, you may discover one day your platform falls apart. I'm not sure. But I think faith to me just becomes a part of, I want to live my life as something that just mirrors God's love for me and mirrors that. And that's, if I had to identify a platform, that's the platform, I guess, that I would want to have more than any other platform.
Does anyone have any more things about faith they would like to raise before we sort of move on a bit? Or I'm sure we'll come back to it naturally, but is there any more burning questions that fit?
I have a question for Phil Smith. I hope it's appropriate. Am I right in thinking that you've had some situation with Bell's palsy? Is that correct?
No, focal dystonia.
Focal dystonia. Sorry. Okay. All right. For someone that is obviously has played their whole life and is so as accomplished as you, when something like this happens, you see, if you're not a Christian, it's kind of easy because you just get to sort of complain, right? You just get to complain about the circumstance, and you get to say, "This isn't fair," da 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 da, right? But as a Christian, there's an added level of meaning when something catastrophic or difficult like that happens, where you have to ask the uncomfortable question, something like, well, why has this happened, and what does this mean for my relationship with God? It requires a tremendous amount of faith and courage to go through something like that and still come out of it a Christian, and maybe even more so, I'm not sure. But I just wondered if you wouldn't mind enlightening us about how you managed that with your faith.
Well, I watched a good friend of mine, Warren Dick, tuba player in the Philharmonic, go through this early in his career. And I just watched the devastation that it took on him. And I could never really understand, like, how do you just, like, how can you not play the tuba anymore? What's that all about? And then, what the heck? Here it happens to me at a point in time. And it was shocking. And I don't mind telling you that when I actually got the actual medical diagnosis, you've got focal, this was a quote, you from all of our studies and the videos that we've taken and all of that, you have what's known as focal embouchure dystonia. And we really don't know what to do about that. We don't have a medical answer to that. And we know that it's basically probably going to destroy your career, so you better start thinking of a new role, a new life plan. And I remember walking out of the hospital on 50-something street in the city and going sit in my car and just breaking down, just like, whoa, Lord, this is how this finishes? This is the end? I've tried to do the best that I can as a player. I've tried to be a strong witness for you. I've tried to stand strong in my faith. and this is the payback. I don't. Yeah, me and God had some tough times. I don't mind sharing that, because life with the Lord is not always easy. I mean, you read about great ministers and great men of faith, people of faith, and the struggles they go through to the point of death sometimes. And it's like, is that really fair? But then that is what it is, right? Every one of the disciples ended up martyred. But I guess there was an element where my faith was attacked, a time when the faith was attacked. But then there was this sort of internal thing. The way I was built was like, I don't believe that God gives something and then takes it away. I don't believe that he gives a gift and then just snatches it back, says you can't have that anymore, I'm taking that back. I don't believe he does that in a meanness. So I didn't understand, and to this day I don't understand why that happened. But there was something on my inside that just said, I'm not going to give in to that. I'm going to fight my way through this. I'm going to keep going forward. I don't understand. I do not see God's hand in this, but I'm going to trust his heart. For God says that he's given us, he knows the plan of our life, and he set that out before us. It's a plan for good. It's not a plan for evil. So what appears evil for me right now, I'm just going to hang on to my trust in who he is and who his nature is, and know that he's got something better on the other side of this. And I just, so I actually turned down the teaching gig because I said, you're not getting who you think you're getting. They said, come and teach. I went and taught, and I've had a wonderful, because I think of what I went through, I then had a more sympathetic relationship with students. I could appreciate what some of the struggles they were going through, whereas before I just say, just play. But then I used that time, and they encouraged me. I had some of my grads in my early years who would, the last 10 minutes, they'd say, Mr. Smith, let's play duets. And I'm going, I can't play. And they said, come on, play. And come on, play. And they'd force me to play duets. And it was just, I spent 11 years of trying to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. And I'm not recovered. Do I play? Yeah, I play, but it's not the way that I used to play. There's still elements of dystonia that are there. And I've just learned to play around them, force them and trick them this way and that way. And it also means that I did something recently last Christmas time where I went out to play someplace. And it was terrible. It was terrible. It was embarrassing how poorly I played. But my identity is not in the trumpet. And I could just fluff that off, say, that's what it is. But that's, I'm giving you my best. And tonight that wasn't very good. I'm sorry. But my identity is not there. And so God has used that, I think, to change me and to mold me in different ways and to open other doors that perhaps I might not have gone down. I might not have left the Philharmonic had I not been forced to leave the Philharmonic. I might not have gone to teach and have an impact on other students had that not happened. I don't understand it all. I won't understand it this side of heaven. But I'm going to trust God that he's got a plan out of this. And I think my own stubbornness and the way he made me and my belief in him that he's got a greater good just forces me to keep going forward and to find out what that next plan is.
Thank you for sharing that. That's very inspiring, and it's inspiring for my faith. Thank you.
Phil Jr., you've been sat there very quietly and patiently. Is there any questions that you are burning to ask these other two gentlemen on the Zoom?
I've got one for each, but let's start with Phil Senior, if I could call him that.
Phil the Elder, as I said. You got Phil the Younger and Phil the Elder.
I mean, you were somebody I hugely admire, and certainly as a young Salvation Army boy, and that might sound like I'm putting down that tradition or where I came from. I'm still extremely proud of it, but I didn't know anything about orchestras and how to play in an orchestra or even think about playing the trumpet really, but there were books you used to send to the family, etc., etc., which I can only thank you for, the recordings. I've got two questions for you on that though. One is there a particular recording you've done that you're most proud of? But the second one, this is a bit of you talk about geeking out over mouthpieces, but this is my sort of geek moment, because another trumpet player I grew up idolising was, of course, Maurice Murphy. And when I was fortunate enough to get the first trumpet job at the LSO, when I landed that, I thought, well, this is me set. Naively, I thought, this is it. The two players I know that I idolise that came up through the same tradition as me were Phil Smith, Maurice Murphy, both of whom have done 30 years, 35 years in that particular role. Now, of course, I've gone down a different path for many different reasons, but the one thing that always struck me about Maurice was what he must have seen over that 30-year period in terms of the change in the industry. And I wondered if there was anything that stood out to you in the industry because it must have been a very, very different. You talk about even somebody like Bud Herseth. I mean, would somebody like Bud and Bud's character survive it in this world now? It's very, very different, isn't it? And I wondered if there was something, silly little things that Maurice used to say, like when he was in the BBC Philharmonic, that they used to, when they were recording, somebody would go into the box and have a listen, and they'd all be smoking in the studio. And that's why on a lot of the music that a lot of the BBC orchestras used, in the bottom corners, it's all burnt off. Things like that. I used to sit there and think, what that guy has seen to what he's seeing now is quite... and he was just the same bloke. He played the same way. He came to work. He loved working. He was nice to everybody. But as I keep coming back to it, the change he saw was humongous. And I just wondered if you felt the same, and if so, what the biggest change was.
Okay, so the first one, the most famous, I guess my most favorite recording, you're asking of what I've done?
Yeah, I'm not the most famous, but something a record. Even, I was thinking more particularly solo records, but yeah, if there's anything that jumps out at you,
I don't know. Every solo record I did was a pain in the neck.
I know that feeling.
But I think the one that I did on the Carla label, it was part of a series that they did. All the principal players in the Philharmonic did a recording, and I incorporated into that. Obviously, my colleague friend Joe Turin, who wrote some stuff for that, and then some of my trumpet playing friends. I had Louis Soloff on the recording, and Fred Mills on the recording, and bunch of different folks on the recording because I did some trumpet ensemble stuff. So there was a variety of stuff on the recording. I did the Awazin Trio for violin, trumpet, and piano. That was on there. So I thought that was a fun program, if you will, and variety of stuff. And that's probably the one that I enjoyed doing. And that. So, but as far as over the course of time, yeah, you're absolutely right. I'm not sure. This is why I say, maybe God's sending me through Focal to Estonia was meant to get me out of New York and out of that time because of, who knows? Time changes and events change, and I'll admit, you begin to feel sometimes like you're a bit of a dinosaur. It's like, what the heck has happened? What's happened to the world that I was a part of? So yeah, it does change, and again, I feel like a broken record. I keep coming back to my faith discussion of this, but it's just hanging on to that. I think it's important, as you mentioned, Philip, about Morris. He treated everybody lovely. He was respectful, and I think that's absolutely the most important thing to do. Because in my career, I've seen conductors treat people, orchestral members, poorly, berating them, just destroying them. They smell fear, they smell blood, and they go after it. And I've seen people destroy it. I've seen section leaders destroy other people in the section. I've seen I've seen principal players sitting next to each other, not talking to each other, and going, "How do you function like that? What is that about?" And I've always enjoyed being respectful to people. One of my gal friends in the Philharmonic was a lovely Jewish gal, and we used to love going. We would be friends on tour and get together, and she would share Judaism, and I would talk about Christianity, and we found enjoyment in talking about that, to the fact that she and her husband invited my wife and I over for Seder on one Passover with them to share Seder. And it was wonderful. It was a wonderful experience. And so just to be respectful of people and to engage people, I think, was so important. As time changes, that changes, right? I don't want to go too deep here, but things in the world change, and you're forced to confront something that you've never thought you'd be forced to confront before. But in the love of Christ, I interact with those people, and not preaching at them, but living in front of them and being God's person in that time in front of them is I think how one traverses that historical shift and that cultural shift.
I suppose there has to be I'm not putting words in your mouth here, but when I think of somebody like Morris and yourself, to a certain degree, you have to be quite comfortable with who you are and who you represent to be able to do that, I think, because somebody who's very stubborn, who believes it should be done a certain way. Now, we all have our moments, of course we do, but I think to know that you're happy with who you are, and generally speaking, and you can go with the flow if you need to, is probably to oversee 30 years like that, is probably a huge factor in how you're able to do that, right?
Yeah. And
a lot of that comes through your faith, I would imagine.
Well, it's multi-highwayed, right? I still want, as it was 30 years ago, what it is today, I still want the best. So if you're sitting next to me and you're not giving me your best, I'm going to be a little bugged about that. I want the best. I want us to achieve, to get to the best that we can make this product. So I'm gonna politely and in a loving way encourage you to give me the best that you can, as a quote unquote section leader, if that fits in. Or if I'm sitting in the section, which I'm more prone to do now, I'm going to try to give you the best that I can, because you're the boss, and I'm going to try to do the best I can there. But so musically, that's consistent. But culturally, worldview, the world we live in, that changes and that shifts, and you're confronted with things that perhaps are 30 years ago would have been uncomfortable. And you've got to learn to deal with that, and you have to deal with that lovingly and gracefully, in my opinion.
Louis, at what point did you realise you were a bit of a freak in terms of the way you play the trumpet? Was it something that you worked at, or was it part of your setup? Or, I mean, I'm not saying you woke up one day and you could play a double high C and that was the end of it. But was there a point you realised? Do you remember a moment when you thought, I don't think that's particularly normal?
Um,
I'm just thinking for a lot of young budding trumpet players that may or may not listen into this and have heard us talk about lots of things, which is great, but they might also want to know, as a 14-year-old, is there going to come a point when I get the trumpet out of the case if I do the right things and something slots into place,
100%. But the question is, do you want it enough? And that's my experience anyway. My mother started a big band in 1997, so I would have been 4 years old, and I just grew up in that environment. And I first heard the Big Fat Band in 1999, so I was 6. maybe 7. And I started the trumpet around 7. And I was classically trained. Went to some very nice music schools.
I came into one of them. I came to Purcell, and you played to me at Purcell, yeah.
I did. But when I was at Wells, I really wanted to play lead trumpet in the big band, but everyone was in, 17 or 18 years old at that time, and I was probably about 12. I was like, I'm going to do it. So, in order to do that, you had to have the best upper register, basically. That's what they wanted. That's what they needed, because it was all big fat band music, Phil Collins, big band music, all very, very difficult, not standard rep for a school big band at all. And I also had the play-along book, the Gordon Goodwin play-along book, and the Arturo Sandoval Trumpet Evolution play-along book, which had a transcription of all of his solos from that album, which is a great album. And there was a room in Wells called the Salmon Room, which was in the music school opposite the cathedral. And it was full of Javanese gamelan. And it was a big room, high ceiling, and it was the only practice room in the entire area with a CD player. So I used to just put the CD player on, and everyone else would be in their practice rooms, and there's no soundproofing or anything. I would just be tanking this stuff as loudly and as high as I could, and it would be going out to the cathedral green. It was like the most obnoxious thing ever, and I do this all day, every day.
Just visualising somebody in the room next to you doing that.
I mean, it was in the brass tower, but I would just do that every day, and slowly my register just got better and better. I remember there was something I clicked in my chops that helped, and then I got a smaller mouthpiece, and again it helped. And I remember playing my first... There's a couple of recordings of me on my first videos on YouTube in 2011, when I was about 17, playing Oh Holy Night. And I also did... I never actually put this one up, but there's a Maurice Andre version of Hot Canary where he's playing up to double high C's and double high D's. And I would just play along with these guys in my room at home. Probably hurting myself, doing all the wrong things, as we all do. But I remember saying to my mother once, when I was walking down the stairs before school, I said, Mum, if I could play a double high C... This is a really weird thing to say. But I said to her... So early in the morning, I said, if I could play a double high C now, and it meant that it woke all the neighbours up, but I would have it for the rest of my life, would you let me do it? And she said, no. So fortunately, I didn't need that in the end, but...
when I said you're not normal?
I do remember not having it and being very frustrated that I didn't have it. That's the point of this. It's like I do remember not being able to do that. And that's that's what everyone wants, good double high C and good double high D or whatever. I used to have this saying, double high D is the new double high C, because Wayne had made that the case, And so I was trying to get the double high D then. And honestly, I just did it all day, every day, along with all my other practice as well. But I really focused very hard on this at a young age. And maybe I have some benefits here, I don't know, but probably not. I don't think it's really relevant because everyone's face shape is different. So it's just, you have to work what you have with what you have. But I don't remember ever feeling like a freak. I honestly just remember just wanting to be the best at it. Because if I was, then I would get to play lead trumpet in the band. And if I got to play, I don't know if this is the same in the classical world, but there's something very unique about the big band trumpet world, which is if you're 14 and you're playing first trumpet in the school band, you're getting the reps in there. When you then move another year later and you move into another band, the chances are it's going to be you again in the first chair, again, playing the high notes. And then again, you move on to the next band, it's going to be you again on first. It's because you're getting the reps in when everyone else is sat down on third and fourth. They're not getting the chances that you are, the opportunities that you are to put these sensations and these feelings that we have to play those notes into actual practice when the red light, the pretend red light is on. So that was sort of really what happened. I started playing first trumpet in the band, and then one thing led to another, and here we are. But I don't remember being or feeling like a freak, I remember...
Because I remember that video coming out in, was it Prozone?
Well, the one where I played it in front of Wayne?
Yeah. And I don't know, what age would you have been there? 14, 15?
18.
18, you're a bit older than that. Okay, right.
That was 2012, so I just turned 18. And that, yeah. Yeah. That was actually crazy because I had never met him before. I'd never played his mouthpiece or his trumpet. But I had drunk so much beer from about 8 in the morning on that day that I just took a total risk. And I said, Wayne, they said, oh, Louis, all the guys were like, go on, Louis, go on, play A Holy Night in front of Wayne, play it in front of Wayne. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, let's do it. And I said, Wayne, can I use your trumpet? I went over and got his trumpet. And the tuning slide was way out, like really, really far. And he goes, Louis, you'll probably want to push the tuning slide. And I was like, no, don't worry. I'll play it where you play it. But I was really flat the whole way through. It doesn't come across very well or very badly on the actual recording. But yeah, that was a funny time.
I remember the point in the video where he suddenly he puts his trumpet down, he gets his phone out, he starts recording you. I remember that bit. That's all I remember. That's years ago that I watched that.
Yeah, man. I don't remember being a freak, though. I just remember it all coming together. But the moral of the story is, like, this rings very true to me. Derek Watkins was asked once by someone, they put his hand on his shoulder, you know how it is after a gig, and he goes, oh, Derek, you just sounded incredible tonight. Like, how do you do those high notes? I've been trying for years and years, and I just can't do it, how do you do it? And Derek turned to him and just said, well, I guess I just want to do it a bit more than you. Which is very cutting, but I can see it. I can see that unfortunate truth. You have to really, really want to do this, and I had all sorts of physical. I remember all sorts of physical problems with it. But it is possible. I do believe it's possible for everyone if they want to do it. But there's a cost and there's a sacrifice to having that ability. There is. You can't have everything on the trumpet. It doesn't exist. I don't know a single player in the world that has everything. So just recognize if you're trying to be, a world-class classical soloist, you're going to sacrifice some elements of that sound, even if it's temporarily, even if it's just temporarily, to access those upper register notes, and vice versa. And that's okay. We can be all things, but just not all at the same time.
Yeah, I'm struck with. Winton is a good friend of mine, and when he was a young lad at Juilliard, and he was going to do his recording of the Haydn and Hummel. He came to play those for me, and here's this young kid, and he just sounds like magnificent on this stuff. Like, what I'm going to say, there's nothing. Just record it, just play it because it sounds great. And then in his early career, he's doing both things. One night he's doing the jazz side, and another night he's booked with some orchestra to do the Haydn and Hummel, and he's making those recordings where he's flipping back and forth at the same time. And eventually he says, and to me he says, I had to decide because it was too hard for me to be going down that road where, boom, I was here this night, there I was there that night.
I'm so glad you told me this.
Yeah,
I really am.
And
yeah, sorry, carry on.
He said, you have to pick because they're distinctly different avenues, and you can't be excellent at the same time in both of those avenues.
That's so encouraging for me, and not because I want it to be true. It's just unfortunate that it is. But I've always asked people this question. They've come to me and they said, I want to be everything. And I wanted to be everything. I wanted to be the best at this, and the best at this. And that's what I wanted when I was a kid, right? And the better I got at one of them, the less close to being as good as I wanted to be at the others. And everything is a compromise. But I always ask the questions like, who actually can do all three? Lead, jazz, classical, at the absolute, the top level, all three. And some people will say, oh, this person, and it's kind of like, well, yeah, maybe for two and a 2.5 maybe, but to be able to do all of them. Arturo springs to mind. He sometimes comes up, but Arturo, again, it seems to be like seasons of the career. It seems like seasons. It's like Winston had a season playing that stuff, and it was unbelievable. And I bet you, if you played it now, it would be incredible. But it might not be maybe to his satisfactory level, which is why he said, I have to pick. But that fills me with a lot of... I'm really grateful that you said that. Thank you.
But Phil, correct me if I'm wrong though, because I mean I did have a chat. You obviously know Winton better than I do, but I have had a few chats and dealings with Winton, and I spoke to him. An album that I grew up absolutely idolising, like most of us, was his Carnival album. That I still think is an amazing. And I spoke to him after a concert that I did with him about that record, and he was quite open about the fact that he'd been almost coached by. Now I'm sure the way the guy is, he was being extremely modest, but he was quite open about that he didn't come natural to him, and that he had to sort of be coached about how to do this in that style and that in that style. And the impression I was getting was very much that jazz was his thing. Jazz was his. That was what he was natural, what felt very natural to him. And anything outside of that, he felt he had to work very hard at. Now, for all I know, I don't know him, as I say, as well as you do, but that might be him being slightly modest. But that's the impression he gave.
I think that's true. I think his upbringing was jazz. But, but then, like most jazz players will say, you've got to get a foundation in fundamental types of things. And,
he took that very seriously.
Marvin Stamm. I mean, you watch Marvin Stamm play his solos, and they're like watching finger studies by. They're just wonderful. Great technique is my point. So yes, I think he was very. I mean, Winton's just a phenomenon. I'm not taking anything away, but I think he was probably more comfortable in the jazz arena, but he for sure could do the other arena. I think of it like triathletes, right? The triathletes, the guys that are winners in the triathlete, are not the guys that run the fastest dash or the longest mile or the swim the fastest. They're in the conglomerate, they're the best. But in the individuals, they're not the best.
Do you think now might be a good time to jump into those wild card questions, unless anyone has any more serious question? I'm sure these will be serious.
I can ask a quick one to Phil Cobb about golf. You're into golf, I'm into golf, I like golf. I only started golf in 2021. But the more I play golf and the more I play trumpet, the more I realise they're just the same thing. Do you feel this? Or do you?
I don't play golf like that. Why do I play golf? I think sometimes the schedule. Initially, I think the reason I got into it was a close mate of mine sort of dragged me into it in some ways. But it's a bit like being dragged along to band practice, I suppose. But he dragged me along to play. But I think initially it was the way I was working when I first started doing professional work. At times could be quite a brutal schedule. And I think for a lot of people, the put off with golf is that it takes 4.5 hours, 5 hours, or you're out of the house for 6 hours. Now, obviously, that's a lot more complicated now I've got a kid. But fortunately, my father-in-law plays golf as well, so I can sort of get away with it. But I think for me, having that 4.5 hours, 5 hours that took me out of playing the trumpet and out of the music world and all that matters, I think the amazing thing about the game of golf is that all that matters, and it's why it certainly gets the better of me sometimes, all that matters for that 4.5, 5 hours is getting that stupid ball in that hole that is 150 yards, 250 yards, 400 yards up that fairway. And for somebody like me to have something like that where I just switch off, and that is what's important to me for that 4.5 hours, I just loved it. But then, of course, the social side of it is great. If you play with the right people, you talk about all sorts of things on a golf course that you wouldn't normally. And that can be sometimes quite personal, So I think it's allowing, possibly what I love about it in a manic world now, that having 4.5 hours where you're surrounded by nature and you're with somebody that you've chosen to spend the day with, and nobody's forced you to do it, and you're able to share whatever you want to share, that freedom, I think is lovely.
Love it. Thank you.
Is golf all trumpet players thing? Phil the Elder, do you play golf?
No, I'm an angry golfer. I gave up on that.
We're all one of those.
Yeah, Herseth was a golfer, and he would try to get us out, and I would just get so frustrated. All I do when I tee off is I just cut the grass. I can't seem to get the ball up in the air. So the only golf I enjoy is mini golf.
Any more wild card questions?
Louis, are we going to win the double this year?
Yeah.
But you've got to have two answers, because Simon Gash is going to stitch it together, so you can say yes and no, and then you'll be right whatever when it goes out next month or whatever.
We'll win it, and Tottenham will go down.
Oh, the dream season.
Thank you so much again for your time. It really has been just so exciting sitting here listening to your chat. I know you've just been yourselves, but it's been absolutely fascinating. All the different things we've touched upon, your openness with your faith. It's been incredible to hear your stories, your outlook, a bit about trumpet playing as well in there in between. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast once again. And well, hopefully hear from all you again at some point in the future, perhaps. We'll see. But yeah, thank you for joining.
Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, it's been great fun talking to you guys. Appreciate it. A lot of this, it's nice to do it. It'd be better to do it over a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, but this is the best we could do. Loved it.
It's funny, Phil, because a lot of people with the Salvation Army connection speak to me about you and assume that we know each other very, very well, and actually we don't know each other that well, do we? I mean, we've had a few dealings, and there's a lot of family history there, etc., etc. But it's been nice for me to sit and almost chat to a hero, really, from a personal point of view. So thank you.
Appreciate it. Yeah, and our families go back, right, all the way to Hendon, and
Do you know what? That was going to be one of my questions, actually. Can I just ask that very quickly?
Yeah.
Do you think were you taught by your father?
Yes.
Do you think that had an impact in how you were in the profession? Do you think?
Yes. Yeah, he was in a lot of ways. Just his demeanor is very, forthright. Practice, discipline. His drumstick on the chest was the metronome, and it was also the finger corrector. If you missed the G sharp, boom, it was coming across your knuckles. So there was that, but then there was, and there was people may call that ugly, and aggressive, whatever, but it was just the way I was taught. I loved the way he's just passed away, as you know, and it's been a joy actually to put the programs together for his two celebration of lives. But the thing that he always spoke about was to say something with your music. He wasn't just satisfied on having perfect performance, but it was what you were saying through the performance. So that was imparted it strongly into me. It was to be technically one thing, good sound, all of that, but it's what you're saying all the time. It's what you're saying, what you're expressing. That's the king of your trumpet performance. So, yeah, that was definitely he had a big impact, and his stick-to-itiveness. I can remember him contacting me. He's probably 90, and he gives me a call one day, and he says, "Son," he says, "I don't know what's going on with my embouchure. It's not working." I said, "Dad, you're 90. Cover your break." Yeah. So it was just, he wanted it to be good all the time. He loved his cornet. He always had his cornet next to him. So, and I think I grew up with that love for it as well. And it was a means of his expression of faith, and it was easier for him to give his testimony through his horn. One of the things that you'll find on YouTube of him is in his retirement playing "Just Where He Needs Me." My Lord has placed me just where He needs me, there will I be. And since He found me, by grace He's bound me to serve Him faithfully. And that, I think, impacted me too.
Well, that's just about all we've got time for in today's episode, I'm afraid. Thank you so much to Phil Jr., Phil the Elder, and Louis for giving up your time to speak, and for being flexible to find a mutual time that three busy musicians could chat together. Really appreciate your willingness and openness to speak about your life, faith, and music making. Thank you also to our producer, Simon Gash, for facilitating the organisation of this episode and diligently editing it all together and publishing it with this special video edition too. Thank you to Wobplay and SA Music Play for hosting this episode and our entire back catalogue on your websites. And lastly, thanks to you, our listener. I only hope you enjoyed listening to this as much as I did. Until next time, goodbye and God bless.